The sky over Donbass has never been the same since the first artillery thunders tore through the dawn silence more than 2 years ago. Today, as you listen to these words, men and women face hell on earth between two cities whose names you may have never heard before, Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka. In the heart of Donbass, a new phase of the war unfolds. A phase that could determine the fate not just of eastern Ukraine, but of an entire country desperately fighting for its survival. Between these two cities, separated by just 45 kilometers of destroyed roads and mined fields, Russian and Ukrainian forces wage a battle whose consequences will be felt far beyond the borders of the former Soviet world. This strategic region has become the epicenter of a relentless Russian offensive. The objective is clear and calculatedly brutal: to create a deadly wedge, as military strategists call it, to divide Ukrainian defense lines. Imagine a sharp blade slowly penetrating between two shields, forcing them apart, leaving the body vulnerable. This is the tactic we now observe, executed with methodical precision and unwavering determination. To understand the true significance of this battle, we must first comprehend why these two cities are so important that they justify the sacrifice of thousands of human lives. Pokrovsk, the name may not mean much to you, but ask any Ukrainian commander, and you'll see their eyes fill with concern. This city is not just a point on the map. It's the main artery that keeps Ukrainian resistance alive in the east. Through its railway stations and logistics centers flow ammunition, medical supplies, food, fuel, the vital blood that feeds Ukraine's defensive war machine. Each truck that manages to cross the bombed roads of Pokrovsk means one more day of fight. Each train that escapes Russian reconnaissance drones represents hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers who can continue to defend their country. If Pokrovsk falls, the entire Ukrainian supply structure in Donbass would collapse catastrophically. And then we have Kostiantynivka, an industrial city forged in fire and steel long before this war, now transformed into a bastion of resistance. Its factories, which once produced to build a nation, now produce to save it. But more important than its industry adapted to the war effort is its geographical position. Kostiantynivka offers access to critical routes to the interior of the country. It is a gateway to larger and more important cities in the west, a pathway to the heart of Ukraine. Do you begin to understand now? Controlling this region is not just a matter of military pride or propaganda. It's pure strategic mathematics. If Russian forces manage to create this wedge between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, they will not only cut Ukrainian supply lines, but also create a corridor that will facilitate additional advances, potentially isolating and surrounding entire units of the Ukrainian army. In recent months, Russian forces have dramatically intensified their operations in this area. Intelligence reports analyzed by the Institute for the Study of War and confirmed by multiple sources on the ground, including Reuters, point to a significant escalation in offensive operations. The wedge tactic is being implemented with deadly efficiency. The capture of nearby settlements, such as Novoalexandrivka, is no coincidence. Each small village taken, each trench conquered, each fortified position neutralized follows a meticulously planned pattern. The objective is to surround Pokrovsk from 3 directions simultaneously, while pressing Kostiantynivka with incessant bombardments and infantry attacks supported by armored vehicles. But this didn't happen overnight. To truly understand the current situation, we need to look back at how this conflict evolved over time. The Donbass region has been contested ground since 2014, when Russian-backed separatists declared the so-called People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. For 8 years, a low-intensity conflict simmered along a relatively stable front line. Western attention waned, but for the locals, the war never truly stopped. Artillery duels, sniper fire, and occasional flare-ups of violence became the backdrop of daily life. Everything changed on February 24th, a date that will be remembered as a turning point in European history. Russian forces launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with one of the main thrusts aimed at securing the entirety of the Donbass region. The world watched in shock as columns of tanks rolled across the border, while cruise missiles struck targets deep inside Ukrainian territory. Initially, Russian planners appeared to expect a swift victory, a 3-day war, as some Kremlin strategists allegedly predicted. reality proved far different. The Ukrainian resistance was fierce, determined, and far more effective than most military analysts had anticipated. What was planned as a rapid operation transformed into a grinding war of attrition. By the summer of 2022, the front lines had stabilized after initial Russian advances. The war entered a new phase characterized by artillery duels, drone reconnaissance, and careful, incremental territorial gains. Both sides dug in, transforming the landscape into a network of trenches, bunkers, and fortified positions reminiscent of World War I. 2023 saw a series of Ukrainian counteroffensives, which achieved mixed results. While they managed to liberate significant territories in the Kharkiv and Kherson regions, the heavily fortified Russian positions in Donbass proved more resilient. And now, in 2024, we witness what military analysts describe as a potential decisive moment. Russian forces, having absorbed the shock of Ukrainian counteroffensives and mobilized significant additional resources, are pushing hard to secure the entire Donbass region once and for all. The wedge between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka represents the spearhead of this renewed offensive. Let's take a moment to understand what life is like on the front lines of this conflict. The romantic notions of warfare that sometimes permeate our cultural consciousness bear little resemblance to the brutal reality faced by soldiers on both sides. A typical day for a Ukrainian defender in the trenches near Pokrovsk begins before dawn. The early morning hours are often the most dangerous, as Russian forces frequently launch attacks under the cover of darkness. Artillery bombardments can last for hours, forcing soldiers to seek shelter in crude bunkers dug into the earth. The psychological toll of being under constant fire is immense. Many describe a peculiar mix of mind-numbing boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. Communication trenches connect forward positions to command posts further back. Moving supplies to the front is a dangerous task, often undertaken at night to avoid detection by Russian drones that constantly circle overhead. These drones aren't just for reconnaissance anymore. Many are equipped with thermal imaging and can drop grenades or other explosives with surprising accuracy. The landscape itself has been transformed by war. Once fertile agricultural fields are now scarred by shell craters, trenches, and tank tracks. Forests have been thinned by artillery, with splintered tree trunks standing like skeletal sentinels over the battlefield. Villages caught between opposing forces often cease to exist in any meaningful sense, reduced to rubble by repeated bombardments. Ukrainian soldiers report that Russian tactics have evolved since the early days of the war. Gone is the haphazard approach that characterized the initial invasion. Now, Russian advances are preceded by intense artillery preparation, followed by probing attacks by small infantry groups supported by drones. Once weaknesses are identified, armored vehicles move in to exploit breakthroughs. It's a methodical approach that has proven effective, if costly in human lives. One Ukrainian platoon commander, who spoke anonymously to Western journalists, described the intensity of Russian artillery as unlike anything we've experienced before. According to his testimony, positions near Pokrovsk sometimes endure more than 1,000 artillery shells per day, a rate of fire that makes maintaining defensive positions extraordinarily difficult. This conflict has also become a laboratory for modern warfare technologies, with both sides adapting and innovating at an unprecedented pace. Perhaps the most striking development has been the evolution of drone warfare. What began with commercial quadcopters being used for basic reconnaissance has transformed into a complex ecosystem of unmanned aerial systems. FPV, first-person view, drones, controlled by operators wearing virtual reality goggles, have become a nightmare of armored vehicle crews. These small, agile drones can carry just enough explosives to penetrate the top armor of tanks, traditionally the weakest point. Ukrainian forces have shown particular ingenuity in this domain. Unable to match Russia's numerical advantage in conventional artillery, they've developed extensive drone capabilities as a cost-effective alternative. A single drone costing a few $100s can destroy a tank worth millions, an asymmetric approach born of necessity. But technology extends beyond the skies. Electronic warfare has become a critical component of modern combat. Russian jamming systems attempt to disrupt Ukrainian communications and drone operations. GPS signals can be spoofed, causing precision-guided munitions to miss their targets. Both sides engage in a constant electromagnetic duel that remains largely invisible to conventional observation. In response to these challenges, Ukrainian forces have developed innovative countermeasures. Some units use encrypted mesh networks for communication, while drone operators learn to navigate visually when GPS signals are unreliable. The pace of adaptation is remarkable, with new tactics being developed and deployed within days rather than the months or years typical of military innovation in previous conflicts. Yet for all the technology and strategic calculations, this remains fundamentally a human conflict. Behind every statistic, every frontline movement, and every destroyed vehicle are individual stories of courage, fear, loss, and determination. Consider the story of Alina, a 53-year-old school teacher from a small village near Kostiantynivka. When the full-scale invasion began, she refused to evacuate, despite the pleas of her children who had moved to western Ukraine years earlier. "This is my home," she told a journalist from an international news agency. "If I leave, who will remember what this place was? Who will return to rebuild?" Alina's house has been damaged twice by artillery shells landing nearby. She now lives in her basement, venturing out only when necessary to collect water or tend to her small garden that helps supplement her dwindling food supplies. Despite everything, she continues to teach remotely when electricity and internet connections allow, providing a semblance of normality for children scattered by the war. Or take Maxim, a 29-year-old former software developer who now serves in a Ukrainian reconnaissance unit near Pokrovsk. Before the war, his biggest concerns were meeting project deadlines and planning weekend hikes in the Carpathian Mountains. Now, he navigates minefields and directs artillery fire on enemy positions. "I never imagined I would be doing this," he confessed in a rare moment of reflection. But when your country's existence is threatened, you discover capabilities within yourself you never knew existed. These individual stories multiply across the region, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of extraordinary circumstances. Elderly people who survive in buildings without windows or running water. Volunteers who risk their lives to evacuate civilians from combat zones. Medics who work around the clock to save lives in field hospitals with limited supplies. Against this backdrop of human struggle comes a development that has sent ripples of concern through Ukrainian defensive positions. The recent appointment of General Andrei Mordvichev as commander of Russian ground forces represents a clear message of intensification. Mordvichev is no ordinary general. Among his own men and in military circles, he has earned a sinister nickname, General Blood. This title is not given lightly. Mordvichev became known for his aggressive tactics and willingness to accept high casualty numbers to achieve strategic objectives. It was under his command that we saw some of the most brutal battles of this war, including devastating campaigns in Mariupol and Avdiivka. Reports from the U.S. Sun and Business Insider have documented his relentless approach to warfare. For Mordvichev, the value of human life, even of his own soldiers, appears to be secondary to mission accomplishment. This military philosophy, reminiscent of Soviet tactics from World War II, prioritizes volume and constant pressure over precision and force preservation. With Mordvichev in command, we can expect an increase in the intensity of attacks, with waves of soldiers being sent against Ukrainian positions with seemingly little concern for human losses. It's a tactic that relies on Russian numerical superiority, a resource that Moscow appears willing to spend prodigally. Military experts point to Mordvichev's operational history as cause for serious concern. In Mariupol, his forces employed a strategy of systematic destruction, reducing urban areas to rubble through sustained artillery bombardment before sending in ground troops to clear remaining resistance. The humanitarian cost was enormous, with civilian casualties reaching numbers that shocked even seasoned war correspondents. In Avdiivka, a similar pattern emerged. Russian forces under his direction launched repeated frontal assaults against heavily fortified Ukrainian positions. The casualty rates were staggering, with some military analysts estimating that Russian forces suffered losses at a ratio of 8-1 compared to Ukrainian defenders. Yet Mordvichev persisted, eventually overwhelming Ukrainian positions through sheer numerical advantage. Now, this same commander turns his attention to the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka line. Ukrainian intelligence reports suggest he has been given a clear mandate: secure this strategic corridor regardless of cost. The implications for both the military situation and the humanitarian crisis are profoundly disturbing. Beyond the military calculations and strategic movements, a humanitarian catastrophe unfolds daily. The human cost of this conflict extends far beyond combat casualties, affecting every aspect of civilian life in the region. The most immediate threat comes from direct attacks. Despite international humanitarian law prohibiting the targeting of civilians, residential areas in both Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka have suffered repeated bombardments. Schools, hospitals, and apartment buildings bear the scars of war, with entire city blocks reduced to rubble in the hardest-hit areas. Those who survive the initial attacks face a cascade of secondary crises. Critical infrastructure has been severely damaged or deliberately targeted. Power substations, water treatment facilities, and heating plants operate at reduced capacity when they function at all. In the bitter Ukrainian winter, temperatures regularly drop well below freezing, turning homes without heat into ice boxes where the elderly and vulnerable are a particular risk. Access to health care has become another casualty of the conflict. Many medical professionals have evacuated, while those who remain work in increasingly difficult conditions. Hospitals operate with intermittent power, relying on generators when available. Medical supplies run short, forcing doctors to make impossible triage decisions. Chronic conditions go untreated as medications become scarce or completely unavailable. Food security has deteriorated dramatically. Supply chains have been disrupted by fighting, and agricultural production has plummeted as farmers flee or find their fields too dangerous to cultivate. Humanitarian aid organizations attempt to fill the gap, but their operations are hampered by security concerns and logistical challenges. Perhaps most insidiously, a mental health crisis shadows the physical dangers. The psychological impact of living under constant threat, of hearing artillery day and night, of never knowing if your home will be the next target. These experiences leave deep scars. Children display symptoms of trauma, including nightmares, regression to earlier developmental stages, and hypervigilance. Adults report high rates of anxiety, depression, and symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. International humanitarian organizations have documented these conditions extensively, though their access to the worst affected areas remains limited. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimates that millions of people in eastern Ukraine require urgent humanitarian assistance, with those living near the front lines facing the most acute needs. Yet despite these horrific conditions, examples of human resilience emerge daily. Community kitchens organized to feed those in need. Neighbors check on the elderly and help repair damaged buildings when possible. Informal networks develop to share information about where to find resources or which routes are safest for travel. The international community's response to the conflict has been complex and often contradictory. Initial expressions of solidarity with Ukraine have, in many cases, translated into substantial material support. Yet divisions remain, with varying levels of commitment from different global actors. Western nations, particularly the United States and European Union members, have provided significant military aid to Ukraine. This assistance ranges from basic supplies like ammunition and protective equipment to sophisticated weapon systems, such as anti-aircraft defenses and precision artillery. The impact of this support has been substantial, enabling Ukrainian forces to resist Russian advances more effectively than many initial assessments predicted possible. However, debates continue about the extent and nature of aid provided. Some advocates argue for more advanced weapon systems, including longer-range missiles and modern fighter aircraft. Others express concern about escalation risks, particularly given Russia's nuclear capability and increasingly bellicose rhetoric. Economic sanctions represent another pillar of the international response. Russian financial institutions, key industries, and individual officials have faced unprecedented restrictions. The intended effect is to increase the cost of war for Russia, potentially influencing decision-making in Moscow. While these measures have certainly created economic challenges for Russia, they have not yet produced the decisive impact some proponents hoped for. On the diplomatic front, efforts to negotiate a resolution continue, though with limited visible progress. Various peace plans have been proposed, but fundamental disagreements about Ukraine's territorial integrity and future security arrangements remain seemingly insurmountable obstacles. International organizations, including the United Nations, have passed resolutions condemning Russian actions, but enforcement mechanisms remain limited. Public opinion across different regions shows varying levels of engagement and support. In Western nations, initial waves of sympathy for Ukraine have been tested by economic pressures, including energy price increases and inflation partially linked to the conflict. In the global South, many nations have adopted more ambiguous positions, reflecting complex historical relationships and current economic interdependencies. As the conflict enters what military analysts describe as a potentially decisive phase, the operational picture around Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka continues to evolve rapidly. Satellite imagery and reports from the ground indicate significant Russian buildups along multiple axes approaching this critical sector. Ukrainian defensive preparations have intensified in response. Elaborate trench systems, concrete fortifications, and carefully planned fields of fire attempt to compensate for numerical disadvantages. Engineers work day and night to create defensive positions capable of withstanding the expected Russian onslaught. A key factor in the Ukrainian defensive strategy involves depth. Rather than committing all forces to forward positions, commanders have established multiple defensive lines extending backwards from the front. This approach aims to absorb Russian advances, bleeding their forces through successive engagements rather than risking everything on a single line of resistance. Sophisticated obstacles complement these defensive positions. Anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth concrete barriers, and extensive minefields channel attacking forces into pre-planned killing zones where Ukrainian artillery and anti-tank teams can engage with maximum effectiveness. These defenses have been refined through bitter experience over 2 years of high-intensity warfare. Yet Russian forces continue to make incremental advances. Their approach emphasizes overwhelming firepower, with artillery preparation that can last for hours before ground forces move forward. One Ukrainian soldier described the experience as standing in the middle of hell itself, with the ground shaking continuously and the air filled with smoke, dust, and the screams of the wounded. The tempo of operations has increased markedly in recent weeks. Russian forces appear to be rotating units more frequently, maintaining pressure without allowing individual formations to become combat ineffective due to casualties. Ukrainian intelligence reports suggest that conscripts are increasingly being used in frontal assaults, preserving more experienced units for exploitation of breakthroughs. Weather conditions add another layer of complexity to the battlefield. The approach of summer brings both advantages and challenges for both sides. Improved visibility benefits reconnaissance efforts, but also makes concealment more difficult. Drier ground increases mobility for armored vehicles, but also creates dust clouds that can reveal movements. As temperatures rise, soldiers face heat exhaustion and increased water requirements, adding to already strained logistics. Parallel to the physical battle rages an equally intense information war. Both sides recognize the crucial importance of shaping narratives around the conflict, with implications for domestic morale, international support, and diplomatic leverage. Russian state media presents the operation as a necessary action against an existential threat, frequently characterizing Ukrainian forces as Nazis, despite the lack of evidence supporting such claims. Successes are amplified while setbacks go unreported. Civilian casualties are either denied or attributed to Ukrainian actions. This tightly controlled information environment shapes Russian public understanding of the conflict in ways that support continued prosecution of the war. Ukrainian information operations, by contrast, emphasize the defensive nature of their struggle and highlight Russian attacks on civilian targets. Social media plays a crucial role in Ukrainian efforts, with soldiers and civilians alike documenting the reality of the conflict through smartphone videos and photographs. These unfiltered glimpses of war have proven powerful in generating international sympathy and support. Western media organizations attempt to navigate this complex information environment, striving for accuracy while facing access limitations and security concerns. Independent verification of claims from either side presents significant challenges, particularly in active combat zones where few outside observers are present. Disinformation and misinformation further complicate the picture. Deliberately false narratives, manipulated images, and context-free video clips circulate widely on social media platforms. The speed of modern information transmission often outpaces verification processes, allowing false claims to shape perceptions before they can be debunked. For civilians in the conflict zone, accurate information can be a matter of life and death. Knowing which routes are safe for evacuation or which areas are likely to be targeted next is crucial for survival. Local telegram channels, radio broadcasts, and word-of-mouth form critical information networks that help people navigate the dangerous reality they face. While the immediate focus remains on the military situation between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, the broader geopolitical implications of this conflict extend far beyond eastern Ukraine. What happens in this contested corridor will reverberate through international relations for decades to come. For Ukraine, the stakes cannot be higher. Beyond the immediate territorial concerns lies the fundamental question of national survival as an independent, sovereign state. Ukrainian leaders have consistently framed their resistance not just as a defense of territory, but as a fight for the right to determine their own future free from external coercion. For Russia, the conflict represents a critical test of its revanchist ambitions and its ability to project power in what it considers its sphere of influence. Failure to achieve objectives in Ukraine would have significant implications for Russian prestige and could potentially threaten domestic political stability. Success, conversely, might embolden further assertive actions beyond Ukraine's borders. Western nations face their own set of strategic calculations. The conflict has revitalized NATO, reversing years of questioning about the alliance's relevance and prompting previously neutral states like Finland and Sweden to seek membership. Yet questions persist about long-term commitments to Ukraine and the sustainability of current levels of military and economic support. China watches carefully from the sidelines, maintaining formal neutrality while deepening economic ties with Russia. Beijing's approach reflects broader strategic concerns about Western power and influence, with the Ukraine conflict viewed as one element in a complex global rebalancing of power. The conflict has also accelerated broader geopolitical realignments. Energy relationships have been fundamentally altered, particularly between Russia and Europe. New security arrangements are being considered across multiple regions. Defense spending has increased significantly among many Western nations, reversing post-Cold War trends. Perhaps most fundamentally, the conflict challenges core principles of the post-World War II international order. The prohibition against territorial conquest through military force, a cornerstone of the United Nations Charter, faces its most serious test in generations. The outcome will inevitably shape how similar situations are approached in the future, with implications for potential flashpoints worldwide. What does the immediate future hold for this critical sector of the front? Military analysts offer varying assessments, but certain patterns emerge from their analyses. The Atlantic Council and other research institutions suggest that Russia may be preparing for an even more aggressive summer offensive, aiming to consolidate territorial gains in Donbass before new packages of Western military aid can have significant impact on the battlefield. Intelligence reports indicate continued Russian force buildup, including the deployment of newly formed units equipped with recently manufactured equipment. Ukrainian defensive preparations continue as well. Foreign supplied equipment, including advanced artillery systems and anti-tank weapons, strengthens defensive capabilities. Training programs, both within Ukraine and in partner nations, work to increase the skill level of Ukrainian forces, many of whom entered the conflict with limited prior military experience. The critical question remains whether Ukrainian forces can maintain coherent defensive lines in the face of continued Russian pressure. If the wedge between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka is driven deeper, it could threaten to isolate significant Ukrainian formations, creating a potential cauldron reminiscent of earlier battles in this conflict. Weather conditions will play an important role in the timing of operations. The current period of relative ground stability, following the spring mud season, provides optimal conditions for mechanized warfare. Both sides recognize this window of opportunity, adding urgency to their respective operational timelines. Logistics will remain a decisive factor. For Ukrainian forces, maintaining supply lines to forward units becomes increasingly challenging as Russian forces threaten key transportation routes. For Russian forces, the challenge involves sustaining offensive operations at sufficient intensity to achieve breakthroughs while managing increasingly extended supply lines. Amidst this strategic analysis and technical assessment, we must never lose sight of the fundamental human dimension of this conflict. The true measure of what is happening between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka cannot be captured solely through frontline movements, weapon systems, or geopolitical implications. Consider the words of Serhiy, a 67-year-old former coal miner who refuses to leave his home on the outskirts of Pokrovsk despite repeated evacuation orders. "I was born here," he told a visiting journalist. "I worked in the mines for 42 years. My wife is buried in the cemetery down the road. Where would I go? What would I do?" His weathered hands, still black with coal dust ingrained over decades, carefully tend a small vegetable garden even as artillery thunders in the distance. Or listen to Natalia, a 34-year-old paramedic working in a field hospital near Kostiantynivka. "Some days I don't think I can continue," she confessed during a rare break between treating wounded soldiers. "The injuries, the suffering, it's beyond anything I was trained for. But then I look at these boys, some barely old enough to shave, fighting for our future, and I find the strength to keep going for one more day, and then one more after that." These individual stories multiply across the region, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of extraordinary circumstances. They remind us that behind the strategic calculations and battlefield maneuvers are real people with hopes, fears, memories, and dreams. Perhaps this human element represents the most unpredictable factor in the equation. Military planners can calculate force ratios, weapon effectiveness, and logistical requirements with relative precision. But the willingness of ordinary people to endure hardship, to resist against overwhelming odds, to maintain hope in the darkest circumstances, these qualities defy easy quantification, yet have repeatedly shaped the course of this conflict. As we conclude our examination of this critical front line, several key observations emerge. The battle between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka represents more than a local tactical engagement. It embodies the broader strategic contest unfolding across eastern Ukraine, with implications that extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. The outcome of this struggle will likely shape the next phase of the conflict and potentially influence its ultimate resolution. Russian forces possess significant advantages in terms of manpower, artillery, and material resources. Their methodical approach under commanders like General Mordvichev has proven effective in grinding down Ukrainian defenses, albeit at enormous human cost. The strategic objective, driving a wedge between these two critical cities, remains consistent with broader Russian goals of securing the entire Donbass region. Ukrainian forces demonstrate remarkable resilience and tactical innovation despite material disadvantages. Their defensive preparations reflect lessons learned through bitter experience, and their motivation remains high despite the immense challenges they face. The strategic imperative to hold this line is clearly understood at all levels of command. Time, as always in war, remains a critical factor. For Ukraine, each day of successful resistance means another opportunity for international support to materialize and for defensive positions to be strengthened. For Russia, pressure mounts to show concrete results before domestic and international complications potentially constrain military options. The humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate, with civilians bearing the brunt of a conflict they did not choose. International assistance efforts struggle to meet the enormous needs, while diplomatic initiatives have thus far failed to produce meaningful progress toward resolution. Behind the strategic assessments and battlefield reports lies the fundamental human reality of war. Suffering, courage, fear, and determination intermingled in the chaotic experience of conflict. Individual stories of resilience remind us of the extraordinary capacity of ordinary people to endure and even find meaning in the darkest circumstances. The battle between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, therefore, represents much more than a territorial dispute in a remote region of Eastern Europe. It is a symbol of the struggle for Ukrainian sovereignty and Russian determination to expand its influence. It is a test for Western resolve and for the principles that supposedly govern international relations in the 21st century. The outcome of this confrontation will have significant implications that will reverberate far beyond the steppes of Donbass. As Russian forces press this dangerous wedge between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, the world watches, some with apprehension, others with calculated indifference. But for those on the ground, living and dying in this contested piece of land, there is no luxury of distant observation. There is only the raw reality of a struggle for survival, day after day, hour after hour. And the thunder continues to echo over Donbass, announcing not just storms of fire and steel, but perhaps the birth of a new geopolitical era whose consequences we will all feel, whether or not we are willing to admit it. This was Thunder, the Fateful Call.